You published a text regarding the nomination of the film for the Oscars. You stated that this year's jury is facing a great challenge with this movie.
Well, it's a great challenge because it seems like the front runner in this category is a film from Denmark called Another Round, which is, to my view, a very pleasant film about 4 Danish men, 3 of whom are married, and the kind of midlife crisis that they're all having together and that they try to solve through drinking while working as school teachers. And it's a really wonderful film. It's nicely done. It's very sentimental, and it's kind of in that way a traditional crowd pleaser. And but it's very well done and very well acted as well. And then there's Quo Vadis Ida, and you know, this is, to the contrary, a film that is not necessarily as pleasing to watch, not quite as much entertainment, I suppose, in the traditional sense. It's an incredibly, I think, as the viewers of this interview would know, an incredibly serious, in some ways difficult, but incredibly necessary film, obviously, about the genocide in Srebrenica. And it's not a traditional kind of Oscar film, particularly when it's up against a film that is like Another Round. I mean, this is a film that's directed by a woman, and women directors have not traditionally gotten a lot of Oscars. It is about the victims of war, not about the soldiers who are the combatants in warfare. And, you know, traditionally American audiences, as well as the Oscar, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, prefers to have war films that are about soldiers, whether they're soldiers who are heroes or whether they're soldiers who are victims, but not about what is the largest category of victims in warfare these days, that is the civilians. And then, of course, it's a film that is, you know, primarily about the Muslim victims of this genocide. And that, again, is a category that is not one that's traditional in terms of Oscars. So, you know, Quo Vadis Ida, as all the reviews have shown, and as the people who know the subject best have attested, is just an immensely important, accurate, incredibly well done, incredibly well acted film. And it is up against a film that is kind of easier to watch and more traditionally appeals to the people who vote for the Oscars. So that's why it's going to be kind of a difficult choice for the Academy in terms of whether they go with what they usually like or what they probably should appreciate and honor.
And when it comes to the wartime Sarajevo, you were here as well. What do you remember the most? I actually believe that there are many terrible scenes that are etched in your memory.
I mean, what do I remember most? I can't say there's one thing I remember most, because there was unfortunately so much that happened and that I happened to see myself. You know, whether it was the concentration camps, the Serb concentration camps in northern Bosnia, which I visited in this very brief period when the Serbs allowed a few journalists in, Marska, Ternopili. You know, these were places of you know, obviously horror that hadn't been seen in Europe for generations. Sarajevo itself, you know, just the cold, the misery, the deprivation, the slaughter, you know, people being killed while visiting their injured relatives at the hospital in Sarajevo because the Serbs bombed the hospital regularly. You know, this is something that is just, you know, unimaginable in what one hoped would be a civilized world, but obviously wasn't at all. So you know, the visit, I happened to be in Sarajevo when Boutros Ghali, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time, visited Sarajevo. And, you know, the memory that I have of just the kind of righteous anger and vitriol that the people of Sarajevo had on the few occasions when Boutros Ghali was kind of, you know, exposed to ordinary people, and they were shouting at him, you know, killer, killer, which he was, and which is how they felt. You know, this is something that you know, won't ever go away.
How do you comment that so many years after the genocide, 25 years after it, and after all the verdicts in the Hague Tribunal, there are still those who deny the genocide, both in Bosnia but also in region?
You know, racism and bias doesn't go away ever, and as we've now learned in America quite well, denial of facts is not something that gets in the way of people believing, the opposite of what the facts are. So, this is something that, why do people in Europe, believe in this denialism? Why do they fall for it? I mean, it plays to their prejudices, their prejudices against people of other faiths. That's a kind of a key one, I think. And also the prejudice of just not caring so much about those other people, not caring, to know the truth or to abide by the truth. These are all things that are allowed by bias, by not considering, a different group of people, whether it's a different skin color, whether it's a different religion or whatever, as worthy of, your care, of your time to understand them and their history. These are not kind of, new tendencies in Europe or in America for that matter. And it was and is perhaps naive of us to think that just the facts themselves, and even our writing about or making movies about the facts themselves, and proving, the verity of the facts, that was going to be enough. I mean, it's the same reason that, even today, generations really after the Holocaust, we're still arguing about the Holocaust, and that's a genocide that has been even more amply documented, I believe, than the genocide in
Yes.
Bosnia. Many more movies and many more museums about it, memorials, etc. And still, we're arguing about it and having to prove the case against people for whom there is no evidence that's ever going to be sufficient.
A couple of years ago, you were among the first ones to react when you heard about the awarding of the Nobel Prize for Literature to Peter Handke, and he's actually the denier of this genocide.
I mean, that was that was a shocking moment for me, because obviously, people who live in Bosnia are very well of the denialism. They live with it because the Bosnian Serb leadership most prominently is a denier of the genocide. It's something that you have to live with every day and are reminded of the denial that's so very much alive. I live in New York City. I'm not confronted with that, obviously, on a daily basis or a weekly basis or a monthly basis. And I kind of felt that internationally, outside of Bosnia, the denialism was discredited. But I wasn't actually aware that, in fact, kind of a little bit under the surface, but not entirely under the surface, the denialism outside of the borders of Bosnia, the former Yugoslavia, was actually very much alive. So alive, in fact, that somebody who is himself a denier, the Austrian writer Peter Handke, was awarded a Nobel Prize for Literature by the Swedish Academy, which chooses the winner. And so when that award was announced, I just, I reacted to it, and I started writing about it and investigating Peter Handke, because people weren't, even I think some of the members of the Swedish Academy who voted for him weren't aware or fully aware of his denialism. And although they should have been, when you're going to give an award of this significance to somebody, you better look into their background and know exactly what they stand for, what their books describe, whether those books are fair or accurate to history or not, which they're not. They didn't, I think some of them didn't do their due diligence. Some of them did and didn't care because, who cares about Muslims? I think that's the view of a lot of kind of white people in Europe. I shouldn't say white people, I say people in Europe. And went to Stockholm for the award ceremony and was able to ask Handke a question about his denialism.